Good afternoon, Kat. How are you?
I'm great. How are you? It's really good to be here.
Very good, thank you. And thank you so much for making the time to join this series of Sentientist Conversations. It's great to have you
Always
here.
got time for sentientism. Always got time for
Now you
sentientism,
know
I
what it
tell you.
is. And you can
I
pronounce it as
do.
well, which is impressive.
Is that unusual? Can other people?
There's a few too many
So people
syllables for
have.
some people.
There's a lot. There's a lot. I'll
Yeah.
admit it. It's a little bit. It
Yeah.
can
I
be
mean,
tough.
when you break it down to sentientism,
Ism.
it's not so
Yeah.
hard, but yeah, some people struggle.
Yeah.
Some
It's
people
a little
struggle.
weird. Yeah.
And
Okay.
I mean, you know this already from the conversations we've had before. And thank you for watching and listening to some of our previous conversations, but it's a
Yeah.
series of conversations about what I see as the two deepest philosophical questions: what's real, how should we understand the universe, and what and who matters, and what the
Sure.
implications are for the future. But before we get onto those two questions, it'd be great to hear your sort of philosophical journey. How would you best
Oh,
introduce
wow.
yourself and your work?
Let's see. I am Catherine Besch slash Cat of Vietnam Animal Aid and Rescue. I hate defining myself by my job, but ultimately it is me and everything I do and say. And it is, I am very much my organization, Vietnam Animal Aid and Rescue, which I founded and in 2013. And we are the only farm sanctuary in Vietnam. We've been in Hoi An since then, since 2013. And it's my life's work at the moment. Though there's a lot of aspects of the rescue that I'd like to expand upon. I originally am from the United States. I was born in Virginia in Charlottesville, but I grew up in Northern Virginia and near Washington, D.C. And I did eventually go to university in Washington, D.C. at American University. So I studied international relations at American University and focused on post-conflict reconstruction in the Balkans. So I'm somebody who really
Wow.
loves a mess that you get to clean up. And that's why I got my master's in disaster management, emergency and disaster management from American Military University, which I did as I was beginning the organization in Vietnam because I did it online. But I would say my other background, aside from my academic life, which is really important to me, I'm one of those freaks that really loved school too much. I think I spent some time in Alabama. My parents, my dad was military intelligence, former Marine officer, and then CIA and other military intelligence. And that shapes a lot of my worldview, honestly. Growing up in Washington, D.C., and being that political world being such a big part of my life and the type of people that are also in that arena, which now are less than my favorite. But ultimately, at the time, I didn't know any better. I didn't know as a kid. Everybody was somehow involved in government. And that does structure the way you think about the world in a very, very strict political sense. And I think my parents were very liberal, but yeah, we were also very religious. So I grew up in the Lutheran church, and which is, to be fair, it's like pretty liberal. As far as churches in the United States go, I would say that the Lutheran church is probably one of the most liberal. And yeah, we were there 3 to 4 Sundays a week. And that didn't include all the events during the week. So it was very much our social existence on top of our religious life. And I consider it more social than I do religious, really,
Yeah. Yeah.
because so that's where my friends were. I had school friends, I had church friends, but like we did a lot of things with the church experience. It was really just about hanging out with my friends,
What's
just
the
not
core of
really
it?
caring at all. It was really the core of just like having a social existence.
And that's
Yeah.
already into the first of these two big questions about thinking about
Yeah.
what's real, because for many of my guests, it is a story about how they grew up in maybe a spiritual or a supernatural or a religious worldview, and
Right.
how that frames things. Yeah, no, it's a great place to start.
It's an interesting worldview to begin with. There's both a religious and a political and military sort of background, and then just having to figure out that I just don't really believe in any of that crap. And like
And before we go on to that stage, because
Yeah.
I'm always really
Yeah.
interested in that journey of how you go from
Sure.
the water you swim in, this is just obvious, to think in a different way. Right? A lot of people, there's a sort of something in the zeitgeist at the moment about no one ever changes their mind. But that's one of the things I love about these conversations. Nearly everyone I talk to has changed their mind about some of the deepest, most culturally resonant things. So I'm fascinated in that
Oh
journey.
my
But if we go back
Yeah.
before then,
Yeah.
like you say, it was just the social milieu and it was the community and it was so on. When it comes to what's real, though, did you, as when you were young, also believe the stuff you were being told as well? There's a deity, the role of Christ, heaven and hell, the rules. Did you believe that stuff, or was that sort of in the background for you because it was just a communal thing you did?
Quite background.
Yeah.
I would say it really had so much to do with the social aspect. But so there's the parables and there's all the stories and things, and then there's the morality behind it. And I think I've met more people as I've grown up who did not go to church growing up and didn't have that experience. And they look at me like, oh, you're a bit of a freak. And how did you escape this? And how did you believe all that crap for so long? But ultimately, it wasn't really about that. I felt that the morality that was taught to us from when I was a tiny kid, like I was in vacation Bible school, I was Sunday school. It was just like school to me. And you're learning all these things. And as you grow up, the stories are just like, kids like stories.
Yeah.
Kids like stories, right? And you get to color and stuff, and you get to do plays and sing and all of these things. And it's just like a fun activity for children. So that indoctrination wasn't necessarily so bad in the beginning. Here is where it gets messy. And this is where the questions began.
Yeah.
So when I was 14, my dad retired in 1993 from military intelligence. And he was just like, I'm done with DC. I hate snow. I'm over this. Let's just go far away. And so my mom is from Alabama. So we went to Mobile, Alabama. So I went to high school in Mobile, Alabama after growing up in the Washington, D.C. area. So it's a very like intellectual focused area in Washington, D.C. And it's a very redneck backwoods and Southern elite sort of world that I went into. A very, very different world. And these kids that had just they didn't even meet somebody from Virginia. They called me a Yankee. These kids called me a Yankee. I am from Virginia. And I said, guys, this is before Google, but it shows my age, but it's like, I'm not a Yankee guy. So I'm talking with a whole bunch of people whose entire existence was based on the church. Their churches were Baptist. Okay. So this is where it gets ugly. Mostly Baptist, few Catholics thrown in there a little bit. My social group was very Lutheran, but what happened that really made me think this isn't, I'm not getting it, is the whole idea of sex in the church.
Yeah.
Okay. So as a teenager in Mobile, Alabama, dealing with the Baptist churches, as an institution, their shaming of sexuality in general, heterosexuality in teenagers, didn't matter. Like it didn't matter what you were, it was just shame.
Yeah, they're not just homophobic, they're heterophobic as well. It's like all of it.
All of it. And as I've gotten older, I've understood exactly what was really happening in reality behind all of that. And particularly learning the stories of the girls that I knew then that were so like brought up in this little world to believe that any sexual existence was not natural. It was something that you have to give to this like one guy. Like, whose idea was that? And just like the whole shaming of it, holding virginity in such high esteem. And I recently read a book that, what is it? Hymens and Headscarves and Hymens. I can't remember the name of the author, Mona something. Anyway, amazing book about sexuality and Islam.
Yeah.
And it makes you like, if you're a woman listening to this and you've had any other religious experience with sex, listening to that and the way the institutions look at sex and sexuality just makes you want to put your fist through a wall. It is absolutely infuriating. It made me think so much about high school. And this is when the little chink in the institutional armor for me started to fall apart. And that's when I began to question and think, this isn't cool. So you've got a whole bunch of girls that think they're absolute freaks and that they're going to hell. They're all going to hell. They're being shamed to death because of something that's like a biological function. Okay. Like teenagers are horny. I'm sorry. I know you have a teenage daughter. I really apologize to have to bring up the fact that there are teenagers that are doing all sorts of crazy, horrible things and they're thinking all sorts of crazy and horrible things. And it's just torture for them. And then they have the church on top of it. So Alabama was a really important part of my life in that it just made me say, if this is what you lied about, if you lie about this one thing, what else are you lying about? Everything just started to crumble. Yeah.
Did you go after it then? Did you say, I'm going to, this brick has fallen out of the wall. I'm going to take the rest of it apart and really look at it? Or did you just drop it and say, it's not relevant to me anymore? Did you actually sort of deconstruct it?
I wasn't.
Go after it?
Not so contrary to my normal disposition of being so aggressive and confrontational, but which is how I approach everything in life. I didn't push it too much. I really, because of the fact that like the whole social existence in Alabama built on the church. So many of your friends are Baptists at school. I went to an Episcopalian school and private school, and just your family, everything. It's just so important to them. It's this like fabric that kind of, it's like this framework that holds everything up together there. And to really, no matter how much of a rebellious and angry teenager was, I didn't pick at it too much.
Yeah.
And I didn't push it for terribly long because I knew I would be really like just crapped on by society, and life is hard enough at 16. It's not that fun anyway.
And you can, in a way, you need that fabric, right? If that is the social fabric,
sure,
you don't really have an alternative apart from just isolating yourself or disconnecting from it. And that's
exactly.
Scary
the alternative
choice.
Stuff. And listen to Christopher Sebastian talking about that as well when he was talking about veganism, and he was quiet about veganism because it's like, geez, one more thing to be distanced from society about.
Yeah.
God, I don't know, man. I don't know if I want to be into that. I don't know if I want to shake the boat anymore. And so I've left it, but just silently on my own, just was like questioning a lot of things, not to the point of atheism, but just being very not participating too much. And then I went to college. I went to Virginia first, and then just stopped going to church. I've always gone back. When I go back to my parents, I would go to church, do the rituals. And that was another thing he was saying as well. It's like the rituals or something. You memorize all these things and you know how it goes in this sort of stable thing that happens every week. But
being together, and there's enjoying the music, and there's,
it's so much more. It's so much more than the words you say and the morality that they lay on you. It's an entire experience and lifestyle. And I think this last time I was in the US, I was with my parents and my sister, I don't really have any contact with normally. And I had to deal with because of my father dying this year. And she goes to this church, a Lutheran church. She's very active in it or whatever. And I went to keep my mom happy. And I remember as we're leaving, they're so incredibly judgmental. I come from one of the most judgmental families I've ever met. They're unbelievably judgmental. So the hypocrisy of this whole like love thy neighbor crap, and then how they really interact with the world outside of that. And it was very much true for my father as well. He was deeply religious as he got older. And as he was in the nursing home, the only thing he had with him is his Bible from the Naval Academy. And this was something that was so important to him. And it just, but you're an asshole. I mean, like, you treat everybody like crap. So the people that I've met that are, as I've gotten older, that are atheist or even agnostic or whatever, they're not immoral people. And frankly, they're less hypocritical than those who go to church and feel like, okay, well, I attended church on Sunday. I took communion. My sins are flushed. I'm good. I've absolved myself of my sins. And now I'm a clean slate. Here we go. And that just gives me the right to be a dickhead. Pardon my French, but that's what happens. And I feel like morality is not something that you just get to do for an hour and a half every day or once a week. It's not, morality is something that if your church isn't making you feel obligated to do that minute by minute every day, then it's broken. Your system is broken.
And it's a shame because I've covered it. It's one of the recurring themes in these conversations, but there is genuine an aspiration to a sort of universal compassion in many of these religious modes of thinking. But it just seems that it's so conditional and it's so constrained.
So conditional.
You love thy neighbor as long as X, Y, Z, A, B, C, D, E, F, G. And even in many of the really moderate religions. So I think the average modern progressive thinker would look at some aspects of religious practice and universally condemn them, right? So most people, and this isn't a global consensus, but most people in a sort of progressive modern mindset would condemn homophobia, they'd condemn sexism, they'd cruel punishments, blah, blah, blah. Yeah. But then you say, hold on, let's put all that to one side, right? Let's look at the most modern, supposedly progressive religions. And you go, hold on, I don't see any women in their leadership. You wouldn't get away with that if you were Google or Apple. And also at a deeper level, you're still telling young children that if they don't follow these rules, they're going to roast in hell for eternity. Right? Yeah. Now, and you think this is like a moderate, progressive, positive, post-enlightenment version of religion? Anyway, so I'm not going to go off on a rant, but it's really interesting how there are different levels of certain things in a religious mindset that people have just say, yeah, that's fine now. Carry on as you are. I don't get it.
It is deeply problematic. And one thing that you said that really hit me there is like Google couldn't get away with that. You're right. So my second husband was Polish. We lived in Poland. I lived in southern Poland 2.5 years, and he was very Catholic and like very serious about that. And his whole family is, Poland in general is like Catholic. I put those in quotes. If you're listening, you can't see the air quotes, but they're Catholic in the sense that they like we were describing it. It is their societal existence. It is their framework for life. But I think a lot of people are not so into it. But the one thing that really upset me when I was living there, and I realized this broke me completely from the church itself as an institution, is that we'd go to a mass and there's no women up there. There's 10 men, a whole bunch of little boys. Like, why are they up there? Well, we know why they're up there. That's not the point. I don't want to get you into that, but somebody that looks like me isn't there. And that's half the population of the human species. Yeah. And they can't, and the way that my ex-husband would say it, and we're still really good friends, but I will give him shit about this a lot. The way that he would say it is that because women are not emotionally stable enough to be leaders in the church, not emotionally stable enough. Oh, right. Oh, so I'm sorry. Was it us that starts all the wars? I'm not. Oh, crap. It's not. It's you guys. Oh, wait. So the reason that I have to wear my keys in my fist when I go to my car or go home at night is because of women. Am I scared of? Are they the ones that aren't emotionally stable? I'm not sure. Let's go back there. Who are we really trying to protect ourselves from? It sure as shit isn't the women. We can be catty and whatever. I certainly am, but I don't think the Catholic Church seems to acknowledge that half the human population needs to have a part of the leadership. And for that reason, I just can't put up with that.
And I think you hinted at something I think is really important, because that compassion is still there, and it leads many, I think, individual religious people to act in a much more generously compassionate, positive way than their religious leaders or even their, the gods described in their books. I will happily dunk on religious modes of poor ethics all day, but for many people, it is also a source of genuine, rich and broad compassion that they follow through in their lives as well. But I guess, the challenge for me is I think you can find that without having the supernatural stuff, but maybe that's where we'll go next.
That's the real bit, yeah.
So you started to challenge it and you put it to one side and you just left it. For some people, that's an emotionally traumatic thing. It's an intellectually difficult thing. They feel they've lost their, social connections, but they also feel like they've lost their moral moorings as well. It doesn't feel like that was too difficult for you. You just put it to one side. But where did you then
I found it oppressive. That's why.
Yeah,
because I found that it was freeing. Rules, it was absolutely freeing. I found that not adhering to the BS that was being parroted out by a bunch of dudes in robes, that was just a major moment of liberation and understanding that as a woman, I have an obligation not to believe in these institutions. I think I just can't figure out how any woman can read the Bible and be like, no, it's all on our side.
Yeah. It's not just the Old Testament either, I'll tell you.
No, it's really not all that nice. And I just didn't really see that as being something that was so important to me, I think, until I lived outside of the United States. I moved, I guess I was 26 by the time I started traveling internationally and kind of never stopped. I realized that I needed to see a lot more to be able to have any kind of real decisions about life. And I needed more experiences. And I think having a degree in international relations, international politics, and all of this was lovely, but it just had no real effect on me. And so in the process of going through leaving the country and going through all of these places, and I feel like I don't like counting countries, but I had to do it recently for something. And it seems that I'm somewhere in the 70s at this point.
Yeah. And
wow. It's a good chunk of the world that I think I never really intended on seeing, but in the process I've been in Muslim countries. I lived in Kosovo, for example, which is predominantly Kosovar Albanian, and obviously there's the Orthodox aspects of it, which are the enclaves, the Serbian enclaves and things. But traveling throughout the Balkans, you get sort of a whole lot of mixes. Yeah. Croatia, of course, is Catholic, and then Slovenia as well. And then there's the Orthodox and the Muslim. But I've also lived in very strict Catholic countries, places like this year, I guess I was in Colombia and Costa Rica. So I spent some time in Latin America. If you spent time in Latin America, you have a pretty solid understanding of how the church is so pervasive. It's got little fingers in so many aspects of not only society, but also politics. But I believe through this process of seeing all these different ways that religion is being applied to the people, I think you still find that the institution is really dangerous. The institutions, each one of them, whichever one it is, whether the Russian Orthodox Church or the Catholics or the Lutherans in Norway or Iceland, there is a lot of aspects of it that can be really detrimental to different groups of people, because compassion, of course, is love thy neighbor, accept.
Yeah. And not just out groups either, to groups within their own community as well, which are often
and that's
neglected.
Gross. That makes me feel yucky.
Yeah.
And I really dislike that. But there's also so many really good people that have taken the core of those morals. They've taken just that sentence, love thy neighbor, which in more modern translation to me is just like, don't be an asshole. Don't be an asshole. Don't be an asshole. Stop being an asshole. Stop treating.
You should start a new religion. Yeah.
I should. Let's not be an asshole religion. I think it would be quite successful.
Yeah.
And skip all these stupid rules. And be like, yay, if you're a virgin, you're, next to God. No, you're not. No, you're not. You need to get laid. Go on out there. I feel like that would be a pretty popular religion. I'd probably get a lot of backlash in the beginning, but it would take off. Give it a couple of years.
I think it would take
I'd hashtag it, trend it.
It'd be fine. Don't be an arsehole. Hashtag.
Don't be an asshole.
And we'll come on to the morality next, because that's the second big question. But just in this sort of, I guess, epistemology about what's real, what exists, how should we understand the universe? I followed a fairly sort of classic path from Christian upbringing, and then rejecting that for ethics and for evidence, and essentially becoming either, depending on your terminology, an extreme agnostic or an atheist. Just
extreme agnostic.
My credence in these things is so small, it's almost vanished. So I describe my worldview as naturalistic. I believe in things based on evidence and reason, and my understanding of what's out there. Scientific worldview, but broader than that as well. So in my worldview, I acknowledge it's conceptually possible something supernatural beyond that might exist, but I'm not sure how we'd ever even find evidence of this. So in a way, I'm quite hard naturalistic. But some of my guests have moved away from a religious worldview. They've said, I'm going to put that to one side, but they've maintained some sort of mysticism or spirituality or supernatural sense more generally. Where are you? Have you gone down the naturalistic path, or are you in a sort of spiritual but not religious space, or something else? How would you describe?
I would say that I went from that religious space to a less supernatural, more naturalistic point of view. And then I crept more towards the sort of broader concept of, I don't really know. I've realized over the time, like, speaking of evolution and how people's ideas change over time, I look back at my 42 years of life and the many different hard lines I've taken on things, which I know now to be absolute raging poop. There's no way that I can defend those things now. I've only been vegan 8.5 years. And prior to that, I hated vegans. I hated them. I used to say I wanted to put them all on an island and napalm it. I'm just like, I've been an asshole my whole life. I've just once upon a time been an asshole on the wrong side. And so now I'm just a vegan asshole, which I much prefer. And I think the animals prefer as well. But I look at that evolution and I think if somebody could go from wanting to napalm vegans to being on the side of all living sentient beings, I feel like and being such a jackass that I am, such a hardliner on everything, and so passionate and defensive about every single thing that I think, just out of the nature of my existence and my character, I feel like everybody has a chance. And so that evolution, I think, is possible for everybody. But my personal sort of evolution and that is that I guess I've understood at some point that I don't know anything. I really just don't. And in a world where women aging is so just so degrading, we all just it's really hard to be in your 40s and look at how people look at that. And I look at that and think, oh, God, I'm so lucky to have gone through all the things that I have and had all of these things that contradicted my hard lines, to be able to have these experiences that made me think, damn. I was so wrong. And so when I think about what is real, what is God, what is not God, I think I have to understand that maybe it's none of my damn business. I mean, really. Yeah. And maybe I'll know one day, maybe I won't.
Yeah. I think that's not a bad place to be. And that's one thing I think people sometimes miss about this naturalistic way of thinking, because it can seem quite hard-edged and cold. Like, I've got an Excel spreadsheet and I put the probabilities in and here's the answer, and I've read the scientific paper, therefore that's the answer. But I think the essence of a naturalistic worldview is exactly what you just said, which is, I don't know, right? Let's have some humility. Yeah, exactly.
I've been wrong about a lot.
And you seem like a fascinating, I don't want to talk about you as a case, right? You're a sentient being. But, But as you say, you've got this sort of mix of having known each other for half an hour, but really driven, strong-minded, super willful, but also you have this weird ability to change your mind radically.
The way that I explain that is I believe that I am dead certain on everything that I'm saying at this very moment, but extremely fluid in their ability to change.
Let's come on to the second big question. I get the sense on this sort of what's real question. You went from a religious worldview, You've ended up in something that is more naturalistic, but open-minded even to who knows. So that's really interesting. On the what matters and who matters question, this one of morality, again, that's a challenge for some people who leave a religious worldview because they feel like they've lost their moral moorings. I don't have the commandments, or I don't have the Quran, or I don't have a deity looking over my shoulder. So some people will go down a nihilistic route saying, okay, then nothing matters. Others will take a relativistic approach of saying it just depends on what a local culture agrees. And other people will find a different sort of grounding for their morality. You were never really invested in the sort of moral structures of Lutheranism in the first place. So I get the sense that probably wasn't the challenge for you. And as you said, you felt leaving that was freeing rather than something that left you rootless. But,
I didn't feel rootless, no.
Yeah. So what was your journey on the morality and the ethics side? And I guess there's two ways of asking that question. What's your morality or your ethics based on? If it is based on something, if there's a grounding for it. And then the second interesting one is, how did your sort of moral scope of consideration shift over time? Because most of us grow up loving our family and friends, and then over time we think about maybe a wider group or a nation. We think about humanity, and then critically for you and I, we go beyond humanity as well. So it'd be great to know that story on the sort of morality and the ethics.
Yeah, sure. To me, I think I was a very selfish kid. I think kids are by nature quite selfish, but I always had this very empathetic side to me. I think I was always taking it from the time I was a tiny child. I was taking in little animals. If I saw, this was always something really important to me. So my animals specifically were my life. They were my best friends. They were my closest confidants. They were everything to me. And it was at the same time, I was so in love with my pony, so in love with my dogs. They were my best friends. I had this great time. And then I would go to a church pig roast or crab boil, or in Alabama, it was a crawfish boil. We always find a way to have sort of a clause of thou shalt not kill, except let's, put a knife in this sentient being, or let's boil this sentient being alive, just for shits and giggles, because there's only 80,000 other edible plants that we could work out how to fix. But let's kill them instead. And so that sort of morality, there was always this sort of hypocrisy. And I think one of the things that has always upset me over time is hypocrisy. I get quite upset when somebody's being a hypocrite. And I would say my life work right now has really been attacking it within the animal advocacy sector, which I am unfortunately a part of, and probably will be until the day I die, just because I am so stubborn. But I just am. I'm just gonna sit here and be a thorn in everybody's side until I draw my last breath, because I dig that. I'm into that. But yeah, and I think looking at the hypocrisy of my own childhood and seeing it as I turned vegan and understanding that my moral compass was deeply skewed. I rode horses professionally in my 20s. I was a really big horse person. I got my first horse when I was 16, and horses were my life. I followed that passion so far, and I was riding in Middleburg, Virginia, which is the center. If you tell Middleburg, Virginia to anybody that rides, they're going to be like, oh my goodness. Okay. Well, that's very serious. Or Palm Beach, or Winter Equestrian Festival, all these things, people get quite excited. But yeah, I was doing polo, fox hunting, show jumping, 3-day eventing, all of these things. And horses were our world. But even within that, and that's not even church related, even within the horse sector, which was every aspect of my life, everybody I knew was in it. I lived on barns. It's just like my life. Everybody in that was inside this echo chamber. I love animals. I love animals. I love animals. I love animals. What they mean is I love horses and my purebred Jack Russell. And I love harming everybody else. And you don't really love horses anyway if you're shoving metal in their face and dragging them around, putting them in situations which are very physically dangerous for them, and then just discarding them when they no longer have use for you. So that's your love sucks.
Yeah.
They don't need your love. And I look at that sort of hypocrisy.
It's the sort of love that weirdly doesn't actually take account of the perspective of the other.
Not at all. No, it's like, I love what you do for me.
Yeah.
That's not the same. Yeah. That's not the same. I love taking care of your best interests. Totally different. And I just feel really bad for people that think they can still love and exploit, love and harm, love and kill, love and discard. And I was brought up in so much of that I look like, I think there's always this part of being a vegan where we all look back and think, I'm so angry that I was ever part of that. I'm so angry at myself for being so blind. I'm so angry that it took me so long to see you, to see love.
Yeah. It's amazing, isn't it? It's almost like it was a different person because it's such a fundamental shift in your way of thinking.
So
it's
different.
Like the blinkers have been taken off.
So different.
But what was that journey like for you? Because it sounds like the kernel was there from this sort of sense of empathy you had across the species boundary already.
Yeah.
How did that actually happen and how tough was it?
So the practical aspect of that is like, I would never have run into a vegan in the horse world. Like you just won't. Where are you going to find them? Within that echo chamber, and I'll use this term probably a lot. Anybody that knows me is tired of hearing these two words, echo chamber, escape the echo chamber. I was wearing a lot of leather. Everybody's wearing a lot of leather. You're not going to meet somebody in that group because vegans don't wear leather. And we don't want to be around people wearing leather. So I wouldn't have met them. But once I escaped that echo chamber, I moved to, I first started traveling. I went to Ukraine and then Kosovo, and then I moved to Poland. And once I was away from the horse people, even though I still had my horse, for 18 years, who was my soulmate, the love of my life, my evil twin, like who I felt so close to. Once I was able to escape the people that kept saying they loved animals, I started to question it more. It reminds me very much of how, like, I went to college. I was in Charlottesville originally and University of Virginia, and a lot of intellectual chit chat. And like, I escaped the churchy people and was able to be interacting with other types of people. And that's what happened when I left the country. So I was able to interact with people that were not in any way involved in horses. And I could look at that and say, I don't know, man, I don't think that's right.
Yeah.
And then I was living in Mongolia and I met my first vegans, really. So I started hosting couch surfers, and couch surfers are by nature a bit out of the box. Yeah. And especially when they're in Mongolia. So anybody that's going to go to Mongolia is a bit of a misfit anyway. And it was just one of those things that I just felt I needed to do. And so I was out there and I realized that there's a whole lot of vegans. My first vegan restaurant was up the street from me in Ulaanbaatar. Nobody thinks, oh, you're going to go get some great vegan food in Ulaanbaatar. Who does this? So the capital of Mongolia is not like a vegan capital. It's not like Berlin or London by any means, but it was just up the street from me. So that was my introduction to it. And I was teaching a vegan to ride, who is not particularly vegan at this point because she rides horses again. But she taught me about veganism, and she was the first person that I could just sit down with 3 days a week and see that like she shaved her legs and her armpits, and she wasn't like a dirty hippie like I thought everybody that was a vegan was. I was so suburban and grew up with such like uptight suburban American sitcom like family people, members, that it was very hard for me to imagine a vegan as being anything other than something I should make fun of. And so I finally met this girl, and she went to Harvard Medical School. It was brilliant. And she was a vegan, a real live one in front of me. And she just taught me that, like, she challenged me. She said, you love animals, but what are you eating? Who are you eating? So because after the ride, we would go riding out of this place, and then they give you this awful beef in this rice and stuff. It was really nasty. I mean, all meat in Mongolia actually is really awful. And this is where I started to question it, because Mongolia doesn't have fences. There's not a lot of fences out there. So like the idea of free range that we like to use in welfare terminology is the country of Mongolia. And I realized that like the beef still tasted like crap, because we always get fed this idea from the welfare organizations that higher welfare farms, a higher welfare situation is great for the meat industry, blah, blah, blah. Of course, it's great for the meat industry. It's awful for the animals, but never mind that. Keep giving me your money so I could save doggies and tell you to keep loving and killing animals. I'll get into that in a minute. But I think that was like my first moment where I thought, like, this tastes like shit. Why am I eating this? I don't like this at all. And then I started researching, and people were picking at me. I meet another vegan here and there, and they'd be couch surfers and they'd make me these big meals. And I thought, kind of into this. Like, I love food. This is my kind of stuff. Yeah. And if you can be a vegan in Mongolia, in a place where it's not exactly like tropical and lush, you don't have like in Vietnam where I am now. If you can be vegan there, you can pull it off anywhere. And so that was the seed that I needed. That was the seed that I needed to start questioning what I do, because I had left the echo chamber in every possible way. And I wasn't around animal people. I wasn't in nothing. It was this sort of isolation and just, being able to question on my own and pick this apart. But it was still another year and a half before I properly went vegan. And it was like a challenge to myself. I'd like to do things for a month, stop drinking coffee, which is a horrible idea. It's just like, why don't you just be depressed for a whole month? That's a great idea. Yeah. But yeah, exactly. This is my fourth cup today, but yeah, it was one of those things where I was like, well, I'm just gonna give it a go, because I had looked at dairy and was appalled, just so blown away that I couldn't believe how stupid I was, because I worked with animals most of my life since I was 14, 15 years old. Those were my jobs, working with horses. I understand lactation on a horse, on a dog. Why couldn't I pick it up with a cow? And once I finally looked at the whole industry, I think that was a big turning point. But there was a lot of seeds. There was a lot of little seeds planted along the way. But ultimately, it came down to being confronted. Like I said, I'm a really confrontational person in general. Like, I was born just debating and fighting in some way or another. I come from, my dad is another like goat, and we just are always at each other's throats. And you just learn to be a debater, really, from that experience, and to just hang on to whatever you believe. And
it sounds like you do that to yourself as well. There's an internal debate, and you won't let go either. So you're your own victim when it comes to.
I am. And it's this sort of like deep, stubborn, this like passion for whatever I feel, which now I've learned is like, you can do that, but like still be a little bit flexible in learning new things and taking on new information, because ultimately taking on new information that I didn't love animals and was really deeply insulted by that has been the best change that has ever happened to me in my entire life. And it has ultimately redefined my interaction with every living thing and the environment and all of my habits and activities. It was a revolution. It was absolutely a revolution. And I went scuba diving on my 34th birthday, right after I went vegan. And being somebody who was like, well, I get veganism, but I still want to eat fish. After I went diving, oh my God, I became like crazy fish advocate. I was blown away just being able to look in their little eyes. And they looked at me like, you are the ugliest fish I've ever seen in my life. And I thought, oh my God, I am such an ugly fish. What am I doing here? And then you look around at all the things that humanity has done to their environment and the garbage on the floor. This is in Vietnam. It's a lot of garbage that comes with the seafood industry. And there's just, we don't belong there. And I finally figured that out by being in their environment and saying, God damn, I'm sorry. I didn't know. I thought you were here for me. I thought you were here for me to exploit and kill and put your rotting corpse in my dumb fat face. Wow. Huh.
It's amazing, isn't it? It's amazing, isn't it? Because I guess one of the powerful things about the human mind, but also one of the deadly things, is how much we love categorizing things and putting them in different boxes. And that's deeply frustrating because of the arbitrariness and the hypocrisy it can drive, obviously. But it also, in a weird way, gives me some sort of hope that people can follow the path you've gone on, because, you think about, you could do this in human ethics as well, right? Where people still have selective compassion for certain subgroups of humans and not others, right? So there's a whole world of work to do there already. But within the non-human animal world, almost every human, when you talk about a cat or a dog, again, of course, we come this massive cultural variety there, so we'll come back to that in a moment. But for most people, when they meet the puppy behind me, would not dream of harming or killing that animal without really serious ethical justification. But then when you go to farmed animals, it's a different thing. And then different types of farmed animals, fish, they're a bit harder to identify. And that's, again, gives me hope in a way that people can
change, people can see.
Yeah, because what lies behind all of those different categories for me, and I guess this is what comes back to the heart of sentientism, is let's put all those categories to one side. The only question we really need to ask, is that entity sentient? Does it have the capacity for experiences? And then you can put the other categories to one side. You can still respect the enormous diversity of different sentient beings, their interests, their preferences, their environments. I'm not saying they're all the same, but at least when it comes to thinking, do they matter? Who matters? That seems like the central question.
It's really funny, isn't it? I think about how easy it is for us to use our morality to exclude, like we were talking about in religion, a lot of institutional religion. And then even once you've come to the acknowledgement that dog feels something and I shouldn't harm it, we still have this weird block. What are we thinking? Why can't we see it? that this animal has value and this one doesn't. And I think that's really, really, really dangerous. And one of the things I know personally that has changed me, like in a really practical sense, is, I have this chicken, Louise. I have this chicken. I don't even know why I say it. That's like the wrong verb. She has me, but I am had by a chicken named Louise.
You have a relationship with her.
I have a very amazing relationship. I really look at her as like my best friend. She's like my hero. She is everybody I want to be as a person. She is such a badass. She just takes crap from nobody. And I'm like, everybody just like, and that sounds like I want to be like a dictator, but she is a little bit, but she's also compassionate and loving. And I looked at her one day, we were sitting and having lunch together. And I had the way that my first building was set up is everybody was out together. It was an outdoor kitchen like they often have in Vietnam. And so Louise was sitting on the table with me and I'm sitting there eating a salad and we're sharing a salad and I'm sitting and chit-chatting with her as one does with a chicken. And I realized I was not vegan at that point. And I looked at her and I thought, oh, wow. Okay. So I've been eating something that comes out of your butt, like your butt. Like I get it. It's a cloaca, but fundamentally, this is something that came out of your body and I decided that it's mine and I'm chewing, I fry it up and I eat it. Oh, geez, that's really messed up. I just can't do that anymore. Eggs just really freaked me out. It took me a long time to really figure out the egg industry, but like sitting there having my salad with Louise at that point was a big breakthrough. A lot of these things happen. And this is what's interesting because there's a lot of this, like, we're talking about a very deep philosophical concept of like how we interact with and how we are compassionate for other sentient beings. But I think my experience of coming to that realization is based upon actual life experience and not only my compassion for other animals, but also with other people and other types of people and other races and other religions and other nationalities and other ways of life, other cultures as a result of the fact that I have this experience with traveling into so many different types of countries, types of lives that I have stepped into. And I was the foreigner. I was the weird one. I was the freak. And now I see myself in the same way in the animal kingdom. I'm the weird one. In fact, as a species, we're not doing a whole lot of great things to the planet. Who ordained us, the gods of the planet? Because we're doing a bit of a shit job at taking care of it, aren't we? And I say the same as an American woman who comes to some place like Myanmar or whatever, and claims some sort of moral superiority, and then looks around and realizes that they're all quite calm. And there's a lot of things that we can learn from them about. They don't look like me or sound like me or dress like me, but they are human and different. And they have so much to respect that I need to acknowledge. And that's how it happened with other animals as well. And my interest in fish. And this is Michael Balcom. Oh, Jesus.
What a fish knows.
Oh my God, I couldn't put that down. That is one, I give that book to everybody. If you're like somebody that's in my close circle, you have that book. I buy that all the time. I don't know what I would do if I met him. I was just like fangirl crying. I would absolutely flip out. Amazing experience. And that's how I began this development, this experience of being able to see what I wasn't seeing, being able to slowly pick the blinders off species by species.
And I think that you touched on it before, but that surely that's the essence of human ethics, right? It's genuinely taking the perspective of the other human being, right? Not just your perspective. And we can never do it perfectly, but really seriously, genuinely trying to take that shift. And it has to be true across what you might call sentientity as well. It's not like just humanity, it goes broader. And that perspective shift, again, always imperfect, is absolutely fundamental. And it takes you from this. It's
a work in progress as well for most people too.
Always. Yeah. But it takes you away from that very sort of instrumental love that you talked about before, where, there's a simple, we think about charismatic wildlife and we want them to live because we enjoy seeing them on TV programs, and we have this sort of romantic view.
So selfish, isn't it?
Nature, totally selfish. And we love our companion animals because we enjoy the experience with them. So both of those, we want them to live. Whereas the way we get our enjoyment from farmed animals is through their death. So we want charismatic wildlife and companion animals to live because that's how we use them and that's how we
we exploit them.
But we want farmed animals to die. So that's what happens, right?
So I can chew on their rotting corpse. Brilliant. With this massive effect to the environment.
But at the same time, I still have some hope because the companion animal category, people do shift. There are people who have a fairly instrumental relationship with their companion animals, and there are many problems in that world, of course. But that is one space where many people really have made that shift. They've looked into the eyes of their puppy or a cat or something. And
I think yes and no. That's a complicated one.
Yeah.
Yeah. In my experience, I would have to say from somebody who's been living in Vietnam for 9 years and running an animal shelter in a place where we have dog meat restaurants around us and starting the organization through this species lens of I had just gone vegan when I started the organization, and still we were still pushing on all the media, the dog meat trade, cat meat trade, dog meat trade. This is so sad, boo-hoo. But I wasn't allowed. I was with a partner who was not vegan, and she did not want me to talk about veganism. Her and her boyfriend at the time were not vegan, and it was just like a thing. We can tell them not to eat dogs, but we can't tell them not to eat chickens. And that made no sense to me. We broke it up. And then we became two separate organizations. But the thing is that I realized is that people would say this again and again and again, get them with the dogs, and then you get to poke your little other animals in there. So here's what happens from somebody who rescues both dogs and chickens and pigs and ducks, and just being able to constantly watching the likes on our posts and things like that change. I guarantee you we get 1,000,000 times more for dogs than we will for chickens. And those people that are looking at dogs are not looking at chickens. It is not not eating dog meat is not a gateway drug, to veganism.
Yeah.
And I think that is a current methodology in the species' welfare's perspective in rescue in Vietnam and most of Asia in general, and even the international organizations that parrot that garbage to rake in the cash. And I'm not bitter or whatever, obviously, but I think I started from that, and then having seen that I was this hero to them every time I saved a dog from dog meat. I was worshipped by the gods of bunny-hugging dumbassness and fuckwittery. Pardon my French. I love this word fuckwittery. It's like such a big part of my day because that's such a big part of this industry that I work in. This whole idea of you just talk about dog meat, you can do whatever you want. And the people that love dogs are going to give you the money to save the other animals. But just watching the insanity of the things that people would say about me and the hero worship that goes into dog meat rescue, and then looking at the absurd comments when we rescue chickens and pigs. And I'm a chicken mom. I'm a pig mom. I don't have human children, but these are my family. My son, Julian, is a 400-pound pig. I don't think that's weird. Some people may debate that, but I think the thing that I have to always get quite riled up about is when people think that I can use the dog thing to get to people caring about him. Yeah. And while it may have worked for me, I just don't have a lot of evidence. I don't have a lot of evidence thus far that has been a functional way to get people to stop eating any animal.
Yeah, I think I'm an amateur in the space, but it feels like it underestimates just how strict those categories are in people's minds.
Yes, so they're so strict. 33 years I had those lines.
And there's also, when you come back to your, I don't know if obsession is too strong a word, but your focus on hypocrisy, right? When you look at someone who is only interested in focusing on rescuing animals which their culture sees as companions, quite often there's underlying that is a very different motivation from one that is universally compassionate about all sentient beings and wants to reduce
absolutely
suffering and death.
I think it's quite the opposite.
And it can feel that
I think
way,
it's
right?
totally oppositional. I think it's totally oppositional for somebody to be really deeply into rescuing dogs and then turn around and go to lunch and have chicken. And unfortunately, that seems to be like there's just no philosophical grounding to that at all that I can respect in any way. No, and I say that coming from that.
It is arbitrary. Yeah. It's arbitrary.
Absolutely arbitrary. And that goes so we opened the first nonprofit clinic in 2016, I think, in Vietnam. And that was just a nightmare on so many levels. But one of the things that really upset me was as we were getting started, we found a lot of funding from the anti-dog meat people, mostly in Australia and the UK, a bit from the California suburban housewives that I have no patience for. I call it the bunny huggers. I can't take that crap. But anyway, they supported us financially through this process. And once I started to through my experiences in Vietnam, see so many more pig trucks, chicken trucks, duck trucks, cow trucks than I ever did dog meat trucks. I've seen one in 9 years. Give me a break. I've seen thousands of other animals. And every time I would say something about that, I would get attacked. Not only would I get attacked, but they would attack the Vietnamese. They would attack Asians. The racism that comes with the dog meat trade campaigns shows just how compassionate, quotes for all the people on podcasts, just how compassionate people really are that are big dog lovers. The people that were protested embassies and crying Congress for dogs, but are really not going to have any problem at all going out for McDonald's right after they leave their protest. And I cannot respect it. I cannot understand it. And we lost a ton of money as a result of me being outspoken as somebody who acknowledged the sentience of all living things, all these sentient beings, that we lost our veterinary clinic, which was the first nonprofit clinic in the country. So the problem is, this is what happens to me. You tell me I can't, and I'm going to dig in harder. I'm going to make you regret ever telling me no. Yeah. So they took everything that mattered. They took everything that mattered to me by being so hard line about doggies matter, piggies don't. Doggies matter, chickens don't. Bears matter, pangolins matter, elephants matter, rhinos matter. But 551 million chickens are killed in Vietnam. 8.3 million tons of fish are killed. And I can't talk about them. Yeah. And then I lose $60,000 a year. Deeply frustrating. And so what it's just made me, and people are always wondering why I'm so I get so heated about these things, is because you took everything from me. And I'm going to get it all back, and I'm going to make you cry because you're going to understand that you're the hypocrite and I'm the one that finally saw. And I am just that I am that confrontational. I'm very stubborn person. And I do believe that eventually this will pay off. I think Sentientism, and I think there's other guests you had talked to about this, that said that this is sort of, isn't it kind of a natural evolution philosophically? A bit.
Yeah.
Aren't we headed there?
I hope so. It feels that way. It feels almost self-evident. And we'll come back to that in a minute, because I think that's the essence of the challenge when we talk about the future. But there's one other aspect of this sort of what matters morally question I wanted to explore with you, which I think echoes some of the things we've talked about with charismatic wild animals and companion animals as well. Because some people, of course, will challenge sentientism and sentiocentrism and say, look, no, we need to just focus on humans. In varying shapes or forms, or we just need to focus on humans and dogs, for example. Fine. Right. So let's put them to one side. We've dealt with them. They're clearly wrong. Yeah. But there are some that criticize sentientism from the other perspective. And in fact, the first time the word was used was by someone who said, look, sentientism is just another form of discrimination, because you're discriminating against non-sentient stuff like rocks and rivers and trees and plants and species and habitats and ecosystems. So there are people who will go to or biocentrism, which is everything living, not just sentient, and ecocentrism or holism, which is looking much more broadly at potentially everything, like Gaia as a system or ecosystems. And I'm interested in your perspective there, because in my mind, I'm quite open to caring about non-sentient stuff in an instrumental sense, because those things are super important to all the sentient beings. But that's different from granting moral consideration directly to a carrot or a rock or a river or even an abstract concept like an ecosystem or a species. And my personal frustration is that many of the people who say they're biocentrists or ecocentrists, they're like, oh, we've got way beyond sentience. We have a much more generous moral consideration, still carve out particularly farmed and most wild sentient animals from their moral consideration. So they're now, I'm this grand ecocentric, with a generous compassion, but I'll still have my McDonald's and I'll still have my chicken nuggets.
It's quite funny, isn't it? It is really, not funny, haha, but funny. I want to put my head through a wall.
I should have asked you an open question instead of telling you, here's my view. And but
it's so true, because I'd listened to your previous podcast, and it is interesting to hear what other people had said. And I don't want to repeat what everybody says, though I can't remember word for word. But this idea of rocks as having moral consideration, I think that's obviously a bit far. And the plants rights people, we call them in the animal rights world, the plants rights, can't eat plants if you're eating plants and you're not caring for sentient beings and blah, 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 blah. But then they're going to, because you can't not eat plants, then let's all just eat anything. The nihilist comes out all of a sudden.
Why not human cannibalism? We have to eat something.
Right.
So, and if everything's the same, then
everything's the same. My master's thesis was on human and animal welfare. I don't even believe I said the word welfare at the time. People say welfare to me, it's just a firestorm of crazy. I hate the word. But human and animal welfare in this context is about climate change related disasters in the BRICS countries. So it was Brazil, Russia, India, whatever. Anyway. And I remember just feeling really passionate about the idea that we really need to connect what climate change is doing to each animal, and from humans to dogs to cows to chickens and things. And having lived on the Gulf Coast, of course, you got hurricanes and Hurricane Katrina. My sister lost her house in Hurricane Katrina. I know a lot of people that their whole lives had to move. The recent one in New Orleans, I had a dog adopted there that had to move. Hurricanes are a big part of my life, but what you always see is pets being the center of it. That they'll pick like two sentient beings, which is humans and, well, some humans. Hurricane Katrina wasn't particularly equal in that. Remember how that went for the Ninth Ward, but ultimately, like, disaster management just has a tendency to skip the idea that we're all pretty damn connected. And if you leave cows, for example, to rot in flooded water, if their bodies in the carcasses and are sitting around in this flood water, then that goes through all the different towns and things like this. The contamination that comes from rotting bodies is pretty awful. So the rotting bodies are there because those animals don't get evacuated. Why are they not evacuated? Most of them in the United States, particularly in the UK as well, so it's really like that loss of life. And basically in North Carolina and some floods, they would close up the doors and just let them drown in the chicken barns. And then you have 200,000 birds inside of a big barn that are just their rotting carcasses. All of that still comes out and it poisons the environment. So we are poisoning ourselves by not taking those animals into consideration, and the environment is poisoning us. This sort of cyclical nature of disasters and that sort of destruction that harms us all if we're not paying attention to every tiny little bit of it. And that's something that really inflamed me during writing my thesis, and, really looking at how we've just picked a couple of things to pay attention to in disasters. And it's been to our detriment. It's been to our detriment in zoonotic diseases and the agricultural waste that's then everywhere. And to touch on something that somebody else said in one of your podcasts is about psychedelics and things. And if anybody has done mushrooms out there, they'll totally know what I'm talking about. It's like when you're on mushrooms, and I'm so glad Michael Pollan wrote a book about this recently. I think it's brilliant talking about psychedelics, but you understand that everything is connected. It's very difficult to escape that very basic fact of your interaction with the world when you're on mushrooms.
Yeah.
It's been a long time since I've done mushrooms, to be fair, like probably since my 20s, but I remember that being like a really important point that I realized, and that we just don't have the option to save one. We have to take a much more holistic view of the environment, and the environment being us, the environment being chickens, the environment being fish and mollusks. That's a complicated one, talking about sentientism, isn't it?
Some interesting borderline cases.
Oh, yeah, that's a weird one. But we have to really take everybody into account, though we have to acknowledge that some have central nervous systems and they feel actual pain, and we should really work very hard to not harm them.
Yeah.
And that gets missed. That gets missed a lot. And
this brings us on to this final question about how can we make the world a better place, or even the universe a better place, or how did this thinking lead us to think about the future? Because on the one hand, as you say, I share this intuition that this sort of sentientist way of thinking that combines a humble, naturalistic approach to understanding reality by engaging with it honestly, what better way is there? And this sentiocentric approach where you say, look, if an entity has the capacity to experience, to feel suffering or flourishing, then it should count, right? It should matter in our moral calculus, and we should recognize that needlessly harming or killing it is a negative thing, right?
Yeah.
In a way, those two things feel like a really solid, very simple platform for grounding what do we think is real and what should we care about, which is partly why I'm running this series and trying to popularize this idea, because it leaves so much space for disagreement. But let's at least get those basics. Let's at least get those basics, because I think they could actually be, even potentially universal in application. But you and I think they're somewhat self-evident, and that maybe inexorably we're sort of edging towards those perspectives because they're well grounded. But nearly everybody on the planet disagrees with us, either on one side, either on one side or both. So most people around the world, they use evidence and reason in their day-to-day lives, right? Not many people pray to get the car started, although some do. Most of them will use the key, right? So, but there's a part of their lives, there's a part of their belief which is, frankly, in my view, fabricated or faith-based or revealed, or and this isn't just about religion, right? This is flat Earth and anti-vax and unfounded conspiracy theories and MLMs and anything Gwyneth Paltrow sells. So there's a long list of
Goop. Yeah.
Yeah. So there's a long list of unfounded beliefs that people hold. So that's one problem. And then the other problem is this one we've just been talking about, which is this weird sort of arbitrarily constrained compassion where you go, that entity that counts, that one doesn't, and so on and so forth. So in that context, it feels to me as if it's not so much a philosophically difficult problem. And many of the problems we're facing as sentient beings aren't even necessarily that technically difficult either, because there are some really obvious win-wins. For example, you look at what we could do with animal farming that would be good for the farmed animals, good for wild animals, good for human animals, good for the planet, good for the ecosystem.
Public health.
Public health, zoonotic disease.
Food security.
Exactly. Antimicrobial resistance, CH4 and CO2 emissions, pollution. The list goes on, right? So there's some really obvious win-wins technically that we could go after as well. So it seems to me like they're not easy problems, but relative to this problem of social norms and human psychology,
oh God, yeah, I know, right?
It feels like that's the big beast. So in that context, what do you think we can do to try and move things forward?
From a really practical aspect of sentientism, which I think partly is veganism from my perspective, but also sentientism as it should be applied, I don't know if I should say should, as it can be applied to people who are environmentalists or love animals or whatever. I think, unfortunately, when we talk about like social norms, a lot of that is sold to us. My social norm of the idea that I can both love and eat animals was something that had the RSPCA stamp on it. And that was a Humane Society, American Humane Society, that was like, yeah, no, it's cool. We've approved that this is cage-free range, humane slaughter, blah, 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 blah. And so we've continued with social norm, which is absurd, which is the idea that we can both love and eat somebody.
I had a conversation recently online with the Royal Society for the Prevention of Cruelty to Birds, I think, or RSPCB.
Oh, okay.
And I said, you do know chickens are birds, right? And then I think they blocked me.
Oh my God, that's hilarious.
They didn't block me. I think it all went quiet after that. But anyway, sorry,
it's funny because chickens are the most like populous bird avian species on the planet by 46 times. Oh my God, that's so many birds. And like, you're right. People that love birds, which birds?
Yeah, it's not those birds.
It's not those birds because those are lunch. Those I have to put their rotting corpse on my Caesar salad or I'll die or whatever.
But as you're saying, right, we're sold those social norms, and it's interesting both on the the religious journey and the animal product consumption. In a way, they're distinct, but it does feel like in both situations there's a really obvious answer. But the indoctrination is rich and deep and so pervasive. You just grow up thinking these things are normal.
And you have to be such a rebel to break out of it. You have to leave, like I said, the echo chamber, and you've got to like rebel against something that is so deeply ingrained in the framework of how you exist on the planet, like how you interact with your family and your friends and whatever, and like where you go to eat, going out to a bar and having a snack of some chicken fingers, buffalo wings or whatever with a beer, and you don't want to say no because that's weird. Like, you don't want to upset anybody. You don't want to rock the boat.
Yeah, one of the problems we've got is those rebels are rare. Like they're too rare. So my guests are
because it hurts to be a rebel sometimes.
My guests are a pretty weird bunch, and I'd include you in that, because there is something about this, a bit willingness or ability to challenge,
change your mind,
just other people's hypocrisy, but your own, and to have the consistency and to think things through and to change. And then also to take some risk. So for me, it's been super easy just because of where I live and my culture. For other people, they've had to take deeply life-changing, super difficult, 100%. Sometimes terrifying, sometimes physically dangerous decisions.
Breaking from family, breaking from friends, breaking from your job, yes, absolutely. So, could I be a vegan in my old job? No.
Yeah.
Riding horses as a vegan? Are you kidding? Could those be my friends still? Absolutely not. Yeah.
So in that situation, and this is always a perennial debate, particularly within the animal advocacy, but it's broader than that, is given the fact that rebels are reasonably rare, the people for whom shame or philosophical argument or feels like a long road, it feels righteous, and it feels like it should work, but it feels slow, and it feels like there aren't enough people. So slow. What do we do with the rest of the people who aren't willing to be
right? So this is what it comes down to. Like, how do social norms exist? And like I said, HSUS or HSI or any of the big welfare organizations, World Animal Protection, RSPCA, they will define as an animal lover what my social norms are with animals. And they have a massive voice to all people who are even the tiniest bit interested in animals or not, frankly. They got billboards everywhere, right? That's all a ton of money that's going into this. Their marketing budgets are massive. HSI, Humane Society International, puts like $1.5 million into marketing and fundraising every year. That's a voice that I couldn't have as a rebel, as somebody who has stepped outside of those lines. So their job is to define what the social norms are in relation to animals. And they have failed miserably. They've absolutely failed miserably for this reason. Because I know as a fundraiser for 8 years as well for my own organization, like I said, I lost 60 grand by being an outspoken vegan. It's not a small amount of money. Geez, I haven't made 60 grand in 8 years of being the director of my organization. To lose 60 grand is a ton of money. And it was just the fact that I twisted the social norms a little bit. So these big organizations and the people that are accountants, the people that are running their fundraising and looking at the numbers all the time are like, look, we can't say anything, not eating chickens. We can't say anything about that because I can tell that our income, our revenue is greatly decreased as a result of that. The problem that I have is that if they all did it, if all those big organizations finally just stood up for animals, period, full stop, just stood up for animals and not for the donors who eat animals, the farmers that donate to you so that they get their RSPCA stamp on it. And I don't want to single out the RSPCA, but all those organizations are taking in so much money from people that are diametrically opposed to the idea that they have to stop anything, any of their habits, challenge any of those social norms, and to think outside the box in a little bit in their community, in their family, in their country, to be like, oh shit, this is wrong. This is wrong. I am not participating in this anymore. And so in order for those big organizations to make that change, it is financially a very difficult thing to do from a very practical standpoint. And unfortunately, that is just how the world works. Those messages are paid for. You don't see RSPCA billboards because they're free and people just give out money. You're just able to do a whole bunch of free marketing because you're doing good in the world, which I think is garbage. Everybody thinks like nonprofits aren't spending money on profiting or marketing and shouldn't. But that's how you get these social norms. They've told you it's okay. They've told you that we acknowledge that we should ban dog meat. So clearly we've acknowledged that there is no way to humanely regulate, to responsibly regulate an industry for which dogs are being killed unnecessarily. But for some reason, we can't follow our own damn logic and extrapolate that same concept to other animals that we kill by the trillions, right? So, because it would be financially detrimental to them. So like, in order for them to do any of their programs, they have to keep selling this lie and regurgitating this flaming bullshit that you can harm sentient beings and do so with a clear conscience. And then you can regulate it, which is garbage anyway. I don't know. Has anybody Googled the rule of law ever? And like how impossible it is to even enforce this crap that they're selling us?
And I guess it's a timeless challenge because on the one hand, we want to change the social norms, but for these organizations to get funding and to exist, they need to fit within the existing social norms, which then, are they really shifting the boundaries at all? And maybe they're just
not at all.
Them. Yeah.
Nobody's shaking the boat. No, nobody wants to rock the boat at all. And I think, like you said, like to be a rebel, to step outside of this and to be somebody that's, hey, wait, a fish feels the same as a dog, feels the same as a giraffe, feels the same as a pangolin, feels the same as a bear. And we have to acknowledge all of them in order to make change for any of them. And I think of the future and like, how are we going to change this? I think to me, those with the biggest voices, with the loudest voices have to find a way to change their messaging. Number one, vegan is not a dirty word. It is not a dirty word. We have to stop acting like it is like profane. If all the largest organizations cannot even say the V word, in order for them to say, they'll say plant-based sometimes. So they act like it's a diet. No, it's a moral baseline. And I know some people just shit a brick when you say that. I know, but I love Gary Francione, so I'm not going to, he's lovely, by the way, if you've met him, but I think it is a moral baseline. And unfortunately, it's very difficult for them to adapt to. Like
it's just trying to do what you can to reduce the suffering and death you cause.
And I don't think how is that dirty?
What's the argument against that? Yeah. And it's interesting as well, because I think actually sometimes there's more hesitation in the movement itself about the word vegan than there is in the public at large. And it varies differently it varies
That's mostly true for the UK, I want to point out, though.
Yeah, absolutely.
The UK is so chill.
It varies enormously around the world, right? So again, in the UK, it feels like where vegetarianism was 20 years ago. It's
Absolutely.
Like you don't have to explain what it is anymore, and it's normal. And even you even go to places you wouldn't expect in terms of food service or other product, and there's a vegan option, and sometimes there's
there's like whole menu steakhouses with a vegan menu. You know,
so I'm super lucky here, but it almost feels like sometimes the advocacy movement itself is more paranoid about using the term than society at large. It's almost falling behind where people are.
And they're like, if you can get a restaurant, a steakhouse restaurant in Berlin or London or Warsaw to have a vegan menu with the word vegan in it, and you can't get the RSPCA, HSI, World Animal Protection, Four Paws International, any of them to just put the word vegan on their damn website or in their media, like as if this is something to be ashamed of, yet a restaurant that's got a whole bunch of corpses in it doesn't seem to be bothered by it. We've got a very serious problem with the animal advocacy movement. The speciesism that is driving it is so contradictory to what we're trying to achieve as a whole. And it makes me have very little hope a lot of times. And I think thinking about the future so much is hard for me, because I think if they don't change their rhetoric, if they don't change the words that they use in their messaging, if they don't become morally consistent and acknowledge sentient beings as a whole, instead of the ones that just make them money, the ones that their donors don't eat, then I think it's going to be very difficult to change the social norms fast enough. I think it's very much up to the private sector to fill in that gap. I think it's up to society to find a way around that. I don't think the laws are going to be fast enough. We had talked about farm transitions and other podcasts, and that's something that I'm really heavily into. I really love seaweed. I geek out on seaweed. I love seaweed. It's the most brilliant thing to get people off fishing.
Yeah, those transition paths for farmers and fishing communities are so powerful.
Oh my God! But who's funding them? Where's the money coming from? How are they going to be? The business model for that is not strong enough so that it can be pervasive enough to make a real infrastructural change of the food system. And unfortunately, is going to take those organizations that have the cashed up lawyers, Humane Society United States in Washington, D.C. on K Street in the lobbying sector. Their lawyers are, they're strong, but they go into Congress and they're fighting for slightly larger cages for some animals and a ban on cruelty to others, instead of saying, hey, how can we change the food system entirely? How can we continue to make farming profitable? How can we continue to make the agricultural sector and everybody that wants to stay in it continue to have the income that they need to function in the economy, but making the things that aren't killing us, aren't killing animals, are not bad for the environment, and are not bad for public health? So how are we going to do that? Let's put that money that is being thrown into regulatory infrastructure for cage-free eggs or whatever, which we don't need. Who the hell needs a cholesterol bomb that's shot out of a chicken's ass? I don't get it. But why are they putting so much money into that, as opposed to saying, all right, this is just wrong, but I'm not trying to put an entire agricultural sector out of work, which then has major economic collapse after that. I'm not trying to do that. I'm not against them.
Find a way of helping them transition. Yeah,
they have to. And to think that the public sector, the private sector is going to have the ability to make those transitions effectively, and the nonprofit sector, that's asinine. We just aren't going to get that money. We really need the government to step in, but they're not going to step in if those large welfare organizations are not going to be on the side of transition. So far, it's only the animal rights organizations that are on the side, but we don't have nearly the lawyers. We are not set up. We are absolutely not set up to battle governments in that way. Our lobby is tiny.
Yeah, I agree. And there's already some bolder approaches out there that seem to be getting some traction. So you've probably heard of I think it's Proposition 13 in Oregon, where they're doing a very simple thing to remove hypocrisy by just saying, why don't we just remove the exemptions from animal cruelty laws?
Bingo.
Why not, right? Who's for animal cruelty? And if that goes through, I think it's unlikely, but if it does go through, that would turn Oregon into a sanctuary state where it's illegal to run a slaughterhouse, right? In a whole state. So there's some.
Imagine.
Can you imagine? I mean, and you can see there's been some examples recently in the UK as well, where at different levels of activism, people have worked with local councils to say, look, we don't want 100,000 rabbit slaughter a year farm in our backyard because it's just horrific. So the councils rejected the planning applications. So there are different levels of creative approaches that can drive for this cleaner, more pure. The final question I wanted to ask in these crazily big complex questions when we're thinking about the future, given you've lived in 70 countries, is, and again, this is too difficult a question, but how do you think about driving change in radically different cultures in different countries? Because many people whose background is in Europe and the UK and the US think about these challenges in one particular way, right? We've got industrial factory farming. Yeah. We need to transition away from a meat-heavy culture, blah, blah, blah. There's a certain challenge we have there. But that's very different from the nature of the challenge in China or India or Vietnam.
I'm so glad you even considered it. Nobody asked that question, Jamie. You have no idea how little that question is ever. Oh my God. I needed to say thank you for just asking that, going down that.
Yeah, but do you have the answer?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, it's a really complex question. But one of the things that I say all the time, I have a lot of catchphrases. One of them is that we have to look at animal rights and working for the animals in the social, political, and cultural context in which they exist. So having lived in Vietnam for 9 years and Mongolia for a year and Chile and Kosovo and all these different places and different cultures and different languages and different people, different political systems, different economies, different, income levels, and then coming from just being like middle class, white American, from like typical American sitcom life. And like being able to, you have to take yourself out of everything. I think my morality, like coming back to that a little bit, is just like removing myself from things and my particular view of the world. It's very difficult to get rid of, but putting yourself in somebody else's shoes is super important when you talk about advocacy and activism and being able to see exactly where they come from. I'm really lucky to have been with nomads in Mongolia. And at the time I wasn't vegan, I remember this is a good example I wanted to bring up that I do remember I wanted to say is that there's something called like a horkot. I think there's something like basically you kill like a sheep or a goat and you cut them open and then you like you very quickly take this little knife and go up and you cut this piece of their heart, like a vein, like an artery to their heart, and it kills them really quickly. It makes them bleed out like super fast. And this is their idea of a high welfare kill. So this is what the nomads do because they do in their own minds very much respect the animal as they kill it or whatever. This is this idea that is so foreign to me as an American, but being in that situation and having that, all kinds of bits and pieces of those animals were at this in this pot, in this pressure cooker, and you drink it down with a bunch of vodkas and you do everything in Mongolia, frankly. But just watching how they interact with that and how these people who live full time nomadically with their herds, you have to really look at that and be like, this is not at all what I know. And I have to understand where they're coming from and what can I do about it? Of course, at the time, I wasn't looking at it as a vegan. I was looking at it as somebody who was still quite aggressive against it. But I'd always take that lesson with me. And living in Vietnam is the same. And like that, knowing the people that kill the animals, knowing the people that are eating the dog meat, knowing the people that are doing all these things is super important. Putting my like this lens of, okay, what is the framework that makes up their lives and being able to tailor everything to that. And I don't have the answer to how do we manage this in other cultures, other than the fact that you got to go local as hell, man. You got to go crazy local.
And I think that's part of the answer, right? It's not about us managing it. It's about
Oh God. Like I rock up in Vietnam as obnoxious, loud, blonde woman who's like a head taller than all my staff, my Vietnamese staff. And I'm just like awfully loud and obnoxious and vulgar. And I drive a motorbike and I'm like really carry a knife and I'm just this like wild woman. And nothing at all like they've ever seen either. But the idea that I personally would have the ability to change minds there is asinine. Yeah. Absolutely batshit insane. However, can I provide the resources that I as an American am able to access that they do not have access to? Can I take those resources and build up their own grassroots base to make the changes? To use the people that already understand the language, already understand the culture, the political system, the economy, and understand how they can best affect that social change or legal change, if that is something that works, but which doesn't in Vietnam due to the lack of rule of law, but that's a whole other story. Yeah. But the idea that you've got to give them everything we have, my resources, unfortunately, there is like, I've had to focus on, okay, I'm not going to make social change here, but I sure as shit, I'm going to be able to build a veterinary clinic because they're not going to be able to get those resources. So right now we're trying to get our mobile veterinary clinic started again. We need like 100,000 pounds and it's just a big nightmare, but ultimately that's where I fit in there.
Yeah.
That's where I, as a dumb white American girl, fit in these different cultures. And to be able to give those people, to empower the people that are on the ground, will never leave that country, will probably never leave their neighborhood. And those are the people that are going to make change. And we have to listen to them.
Yeah.
They're not all speaking English, guys. They're not all speaking English.
And my impression from talking to people who are leading change in those cultures is we need a bit more humility from where we sit too, because they're closer to the end state we want to get to already, right? Because we're, in the UK and US and Europe, we're the ones with a mass scale industrial animal agriculture. And often the cultures we're talking about, India, China, Vietnam, other places, there's a worrying trend that they're going to follow us down that path.
Yes, but they're trying.
But they don't have to at the moment. They're further away from it.
There's so much less to scale back from.
So much less to scale back from. And actually, they have some rich, deep cultural roots that have cross-species moral consideration built right into them. You look at the concept of ahimsa and Jainism and Buddhism.
And Buddhism, of course. The vegans in Vietnam, the Buddhists, the people that are more strict Buddhism, particularly where I am in Hoi An, is that they're vegan at least twice a month. Full moon and half moon, minimum. So they can also do it for a little bit longer. They'll do 4 days, full moon, 4 days, half moon, or like when somebody dies, they'll be vegan for 40 days, or all these little reasons that they do this. So like the existence, I went vegan in Vietnam. That's where I went vegan. And that tends to surprise people, but like they already have that existing thing in their culture. Do they know why? They don't see it. The difference is like their veganism, and I think that's probably true for other countries. Ethiopia has a lot of vegan food. Seventh-day Adventist, that's a community that has a lot of vegans, and they're all coming from a different perspective. But ultimately, we've got to sort of look at what their reason is for it. And we can't always just say, okay, our way is the right way. Our way is the right way. The way that I learned in Virginia is the right way to get people to go vegan and to make them understand this is why we're vegan, because of the animals, because of this, because of public health, because of food security, all of these things. You've got to put it into the context of somebody who would never have contact with that world. Yeah. And you've got to leave it to the people that understand it in order to create that change. But that exists there. The Vietnamese, look, they eat 1/3 of the meat of an American.
Yeah.
1/3. That's also expensive, and because they're not producing on as much of a mass scale. And so to be able to acknowledge each individual situation and like understand where they're coming from and why is so important in creating a world in which sentientism is something that can be more pervasive, not just in animal organizations, but within environmental groups, within the political systems and social norms. It's going to take a lot more stepping outside of ourselves and removing our ingrained framework and acknowledging that, I don't know, we're probably not right. That framework doesn't fit everywhere. And I think anybody that works in international development understands what I'm talking about right now, but you can't just take your framework that worked in Virginia and slap it in a village in Bangladesh. It's never going to work. And the white savior crap is just, we got to quit that. We got to quit that in animal rights and any of that.
And given all of that, how does it leave you feeling? Do you feel optimistic, pessimistic, somewhere in between? What's your general sense of our potential to
It depends on how much coffee is in my body. I would say that is a graph that I can make very easily. It's proportional, of course, to the amount of caffeine that I've taken in. I drink a lot of coffee in the morning. And so I'm like, my staff, like, they hate being around me in the morning because I'm just like full of brilliant optimism. And I'm going to save the world. By 4:00 in the afternoon, I'm such a nihilist because the buzz is worn off. And I'm just like, there's no hope. There's no hope. We're fucked. So many horrible things have already happened during the day. It's just like, the hope is gone. And the caffeine as well. But I think as far as the reason I do my job, I think is because I suffer from delusional optimism. Like I'm writing this book right now, and that has to be the title. It's a working title at the moment. But the idea that as long as it's not after 4:00, I believe that a world that cares about other living beings, all other sentient beings, and is willing to do the things necessary to address them in the climate emergency and the animal rights emergency and all these crises, I think that does exist only because I have to in order to wake up tomorrow. I think it's hard, but it's all we have, isn't it? Hope and love and just trying to spread as much of that as possible. I believe, from knowing myself and knowing my evolution morally and ethically and how things have changed over my life, the way that I view other sentient beings, I believe so much that the worst people can change. I believe so much that somebody who just wanted just bacon grease dripping down their chin can then make out with a pig every night and call him her son. And I have to. It is the only coping mechanism I have. And all the travels I've gone through, all the people I've met and all the cultures, the one thing that I think is quite obvious is that people are assholes and people are amazing. And there is such an equal amount of both. And so can I believe in this utopia of a vegan world? Not in my lifetime. Can I believe that people will stop fishing? And really, I believe that animal welfare organizations can see the light and stop selling us these lies. Yeah, I do, because I know I did. So collectively, we have a chance, right?
Yeah. I agree. Yeah. It's an inspiring message to close on. We've just got 7.6 billion people to persuade. So we just need
I know, right? That's no big deal.
Optimistic or pessimistic, it doesn't matter as long as we keep working. So, well, it's been an absolute inspiration to talk to you. Thank you so much. What's the best way of people following you and finding more about your work and supporting what you're doing with your team in Vietnam?
Yeah, so Vietnam Animal Aid and Rescue is an American 501c3 nonprofit. So Americans get a tax deduction for donating to us. Everybody else can just do it for fun. So vnanimalaid.org is our website. And we have a lot of different donation links on there. So you can donate in any currency from anywhere in the world and it magically happens. And I'm in Scotland right now. I'm in Dundee at the moment. I'll probably stick around for a bit. Vietnamese borders are closed. So if you're in the UK and people want to hang out and we're allowed to hang out now, I'm so up for that because I work in a very isolating job. Other things that they can find me on would be, my writing. I write excessively about animal rights and veganism and the hypocrisy of the animal advocacy movement and speciesism and all of that. It's on Medium, but it's also on LinkedIn. I try to double post everything. So if people check our LinkedIn page, that would be amazing for Vietnam Animal Aid and Rescue. And Twitter, I've just started getting back on, but nothing good happens in the Twitterverse. It takes me a few days before I really just want to drown myself in my own blood.
You need the right mindset.
So just be aware that I'm a very passionate person when you read my stuff, and some of it is a little bit vulgar, but I really would love to interact with anybody. And if somebody wants to pay for my PhD, that'd be great too. And my mobile veterinary clinic. I really want to go back to my PhD.
Maybe there's someone out there in my tiny listenership who'd like to fund a PhD.
We'll see. Right. It's
I'd be so happy if that happens.
Security PhD. Or seaweed people. Oh my God. If somebody just lets me pick seaweed with them in Scotland, I'll be happy forever.
Sounds good. Yeah. Sounds good. Well,
but just reach out, Twitter, all of that. But that'll be in the links, of course, below. And
well, it's been a real pleasure. And thank you for doing a small part to help normalize evidence, reason, and compassion for all sentient beings. So
aggressively,
we'll get there. Thanks, Kat. Well, take care. Enjoy the rest of your day.
Okay.